I first saw the photograph on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in October. The archival wing of the University of Bergen was quiet, save for the soft hum of dehumidifiers and the tick of my analog wristwatch, a small rebellion against the endless digital noise of modern academia. I had been sorting through a shipment of donated materials from the estate of the late Professor Ingrid Nygaard, a local historian who had spent her life cataloguing rural Norwegian families displaced during the post-war reconstruction. Most of the boxes contained what you'd expect: brittle census ledgers, property records, baptismal certificates smudged with candle soot. But in the third crate, wrapped in brown paper and twine, lay a stack of glass negatives and early photographs that instantly caught my attention. At first glance, the image seemed unremarkable, a typical mid-century family portrait. A man seated on a stone step, dressed formally in a black suit and hat, held a baby wrapped in a christening gown. Behind him stood a woman in dark clothing, her hair parted severely down the middle, her expression neither sad nor proud, merely still. The cabin behind them was made of rough timber, the kind you still see on old farms clinging to the fjord edges. There were flowers in small metal pots, a bicycle propped to one side, and a window that reflected the dim northern light. It was the kind of photograph you pass over in museums, sentimental documentation of life before modernity intruded. But as I held the print up to the lamp, something made me pause. There was a face in the window, not a reflection, not a trick of shadow. A pale, elongated visage hovered behind the glass, half obscured by the darkness inside the house. Its features were indistinct, yet unmistakably human. Eyes too wide, mouth too still, as though caught mid-breath. I felt the familiar prickle of professional skepticism rise up, the instinct to dismiss anomalies as photographic error, double exposure, damage to the emulsion, chemical ghosting. Yet, something in that face's placement, perfectly centered, perfectly intentional, made my pulse quicken. I glanced back at the envelope. In faint pencil, someone had written, Tersel, 1852. Tersel was a nearly abandoned village in the mountains northeast of here, a cluster of homesteads once used for timber milling and reindeer herding before the region emptied out in the late 1860s. I'd passed through once during fieldwork and remembered the silence of it. Houses slumped into the moss, windows like black eyes peering into the fog. The next line on the envelope read, Holt family, recovered after the storm. I didn't yet know what that meant. I catalogued the image under Rural Domestic Life, Norway circa 1850 to 55 and filed it temporarily in the climate-controlled drawer. But the photograph lingered in my mind long after I'd locked up for the night. When I closed my eyes, I saw that window again. The strange translucence of the face pressed to the glass, as though it were watching the photographer rather than the other way around. The following morning, I pulled the photograph out again. The urge to examine it was no longer academic. It felt personal, compulsive, as if the image itself had been waiting for me to return. This time, I placed it beneath the magnifying viewer. The grain resolved into incredible clarity. The fine weave of the woman's blouse, the wood grain of the cabin, the faint scuff on the man's boot. But when I shifted the focus toward the window, the world seemed to constrict. The figure behind the glass was sharper than it had any right to be. Its eyes were wide, glassy, yet reflective, like someone seeing light for the first time in years. Its mouth was slightly open, the lips unnaturally pale, and in the faint shadow cast on the pane, I could see one hand, pressed flat against the glass from the inside. I leaned back, heart thudding. This wasn't photographic error, it wasn't dust. Someone had been inside the house. That evening, I brought the print home against my better judgment. Historians aren't supposed to remove artifacts from university property, but curiosity is a stubborn, disobedient thing. I wanted to look at it in ordinary light, away from the sterile hum of the archive. My apartment overlooked the harbor, and the autumn fog was rolling in when I propped the photograph on my desk. Outside, the water slapped rhythmically against the pylons. Inside, only the faint ticking of my clock broke the silence. I stared at the image again, tracing the details with my eyes. The stone steps, the child's white gown, the faint disarray of the woman's collar. Then I noticed something I had missed before. The baby was holding something. At first I thought it was a handkerchief or a toy, but under lamplight I realized it was small and irregular, perhaps organic. A bird's skull, a dried root. It was impossible to tell. Whatever it was, the child's fingers curled around it possessively. I told myself I was over-analyzing. Yet every instinct, the same one that had carried me through years of fieldwork, late nights in forgotten archives, long drives through fog-slick roads, whispered otherwise. There was something wrong with this picture. I decided to dig. The university's local census archives from 1850 to 1860 were sparse but intact. There was indeed a record of a Holt family registered in Teersil. Eric Holt, born 1808, Anna Holt, née Breivik, born 1812, one infant son, name not listed, no record of additional children. The entry was marked with a notation that chilled me. Deceased, March 1852. Circumstances unclear. Beside it, the clerk had scrawled a brief addendum. Bodies recovered after thaw. Only 2 confirmed. Only 2. I read it again. Only 2. The baby had not been found. That night, I dreamed I was standing in front of that same cabin. The mountains were blanketed in snow, the kind that swallows sound. The house looked identical to the one in the photo, except the window was open, wide enough for someone to climb through. Inside, I could see nothing but a flickering light, as if a candle were guttering in the dark. I woke at 3:17 a.m., gasping. My apartment was silent, but the photograph, which I had left face down on my desk, was now upright, the image staring back at me. I didn't move for a long time. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was a sleepwalking episode. Stress, overwork, nothing supernatural. I returned the photo to its protective sleeve and brought it back to the university. But when I tried to upload the scanned version into the digital catalogue, the system froze. The screen flickered, lines of static tearing across the image preview. When it finally stabilized, the photograph had changed. The woman, Anna, was no longer looking at the camera. Her gaze had shifted slightly toward the man, and her mouth was open just enough to suggest a whisper. The child's head was turned too, angled toward the window, and in that window, the pale face was closer. I checked the original print, trembling. It was unchanged. The digital scan, however, was not. The metadata showed the image file had been automatically duplicated. 3 versions, all with identical timestamps. I opened each one. In the second file, the face at the window had pressed its hand against the glass. In the third, the window was empty. Something was moving inside the file. That evening, I called my colleague, Lars. He specialized in forensic restoration and had helped me before with corrupted images. I emailed him the files, half embarrassed, half terrified. He promised to check the code for anomalies and call me back. 2 hours later, he did. "Clara," he said slowly, "where did you get this photo?" "From the Nygard estate," I replied. "Why?" He hesitated. "There's no data corruption, no double exposure. The changes between files are frame by frame, as if someone took 3 photographs, seconds apart. But the metadata says they were all created at the exact same time." He paused again. "And there's something else." "What?" "There's a 4th version, hidden in the cache. You didn't send it, but it appeared when I extracted the metadata layers." I felt my stomach drop. "Send it to me." He did. It was darker than the others, almost underexposed. The family was barely visible, reduced to pale smudges of white and grey. But the window was bright, and inside it, a figure stood facing outward. Not the pale face from before, something else, taller and unmistakably human. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept imagining the sound of wind against wood, the slow drag of footsteps in snow. The photo lay inside a sealed envelope on my desk, but I could still feel its presence in the room, as though something unseen was watching from the shadows between the walls. By morning, Lars hadn't answered my calls. The university's IT department later confirmed that his computer had crashed overnight. All his drives had been wiped clean. No trace of the files I'd sent him. When I tried to open my own copies, they were gone too. Only the original photograph remained. And now, when I looked at it, I realized something dreadful. There was a faint reflection on the glass covering the print, not mine. It was the face from the window. I left for Tyrsil 3 days later. By then, the unease had settled into my bones like a slow frost. Lars was still missing. His phone rang until it didn't. The university issued a polite statement about a temporary leave of absence, but everyone knew something wasn't right. I could have waited for clarity, for permission, for someone else to investigate. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph, about the baby's clenched fist, the woman's parted lips, and that pale figure fixed forever in the window. The drive into the mountains took nearly 6 hours. Fog clung to the switchbacks, and the road narrowed to a single lane along the frozen river. At one point, the radio cut out mid-broadcast, replaced by a hiss that rose and fell like shallow breathing. I switched it off and drove in silence. Tyrsil appeared just before dusk, a scatter of timber houses sinking into the snowdrifts. The roofs bowed inward, the windows boarded. The village looked as though it had been holding its breath for decades. I parked by what must have once been a schoolhouse and stepped out into the brittle cold. Wind carried the faint chime of something metallic, a loose gutter, a bell, maybe. Then I saw it, the cabin. Even after 70 years, it was unmistakable. Same narrow doorway, same split-pane window beside it. A shiver ran through me. It looked exactly like the photograph. Inside, the air was dense and dry, heavy with the smell of ash and damp timber. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a room frozen in time. A rusted cradle stood in one corner, its blanket stiff with age. The stove door hung open, its iron mouth black with soot. I moved slowly, documenting as I went, habit overriding fear. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, echoing louder than they should have. When I reached the window, I hesitated. From the outside, it had seemed ordinary. But from within, the glass shimmered faintly, as though the light refracted through something more than dust. I raised my camera to photograph it, and froze. In the reflection, I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Only the cradle, the peeling wallpaper, the whisper of wind through the boards. I turned back to the glass. My reflection had returned, except it wasn't quite my own. The face looking back was younger, my hair shorter, my expression softer, curious. For one dizzying moment, I was staring at a version of myself that had never grown older. Then the image flickered and vanished, leaving only empty glass. I should have left then. Every rational part of me screamed too. But historians are drawn to what refuses explanation, and I needed answers more than safety. In the next room, I found a wooden trunk carved with initials, E.H. plus A.B. Holt. My fingers shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were small artifacts, an embroidered handkerchief, a child's wool shoe, a leather-bound Bible swollen with moisture. Tucked between its pages was a folded letter written in a slanting hand, March 11th, 1852. The snow has not stopped. Eric says the storm will pass, but the wind carries voices again. They call from the lake. I told him not to go outside tonight. The child keeps waking, pointing to the window, saying the white man wants to come in. If we are found, let it be known we did not invite him. My throat tightened. The child in the photo, the baby, had spoken of a white man at the window. I folded the letter back carefully, but as I did, a gust of wind slammed the front door. My flashlight flickered, then died. For an instant, the cabin plunged into darkness so complete I could hear my heartbeat echo against the walls. And then, somewhere near the cradle, a sound, a soft, deliberate creak. I turned on my backup light. The cradle was rocking, slow and rhythmic, as though moved by unseen hands. The blanket inside shifted slightly. Something small rolled from beneath it and stopped at my feet. A baby's rattle, bone-handled, cracked along the seam. I knelt, hesitating before picking it up. It was lighter than it should have been, almost hollow. The moment my fingers closed around it, a high, distant cry pierced the air, so faint it might have been memory. I dropped the rattle. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, muting the world in white. My flashlight beam caught movement near the edge of the tree line, a figure standing between the birches, too still to be alive. I blinked, and it was gone. I locked myself in my car and waited until morning. Sleep came in fragments, the hiss of the wind, the rhythmic thud of snow sliding off the roof. Each time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of that window, of faces pressing against it from the inside. When daylight came, I drove to the nearest town, where a small records office occupied the back of the post building. An elderly clerk listened as I explained my research and fetched a register from 1852. The Holts were listed again, with a final note added later in another hand. Recovered April 1852, after thaw near Tersel Lake. Husband and wife buried at Kongsberg. Infant presumed drowned. Presumed, not confirmed. The clerk leaned closer. "They say no body was ever found," she whispered. "Only tracks, small ones, leading toward the frozen water." I asked if she remembered who had taken the official photo. She did not, but she mentioned that the same photographer had documented several disappearances in that area after the war. Her tone changed slightly when she said his name, Arvid Lunde. The name stirred something in my memory. Back in Bergen, I'd seen it before, on a glass plate negative catalogued without attribution. When I returned to the university the next day, I checked the inventory. Sure enough, one of Lunde's surviving prints was filed under Miscellaneous Rural Portraits. I requested access. The archivist handed it to me with a frown. "Be careful with that one," he said quietly. "There's something wrong with it. It doesn't reproduce properly." The image was dated February 1852. Same house, same family. But they were inside this time, standing near a wood stove. The baby's face was blurred from motion. Outside the window, snow drifted down in soft white sheets. And there, in the background, stood the same tall figure. Except now it wasn't pale. It was black, featureless, and leaning closer to the glass. Beneath the photograph, Lunde had scrawled a note in pencil. Exposure 3 failed. Subjects complained of draft. Infant cried throughout. There were 3 small scratches in the corner, like claw marks. I traced them lightly, and my fingertips came away smeared with soot. That night, the dreams returned, but sharper. I was standing once again before the cabin, snow swirling around me. A light burned faintly in the window. I pushed the door open and saw the family just as they appeared in the first photograph. The man looked up, his face pale and strained. "He followed the flash," he whispered. Behind him, the window darkened as something enormous passed by. The woman clutched the baby tighter, murmuring a prayer under her breath. The child's hand opened, revealing what it held, a fragment of mirror, no larger than a coin. "He won't come while we look," she said. He needs the dark to enter. Then the candle guttered out, and I woke to the sound of shattering glass. The photo frame on my desk had cracked clean through. For days, I tried to rationalize. Light refraction, dream imprinting, suggestive paranoia, textbook explanations I had once lectured about. But none could explain what followed. Every reflection in my apartment began to distort. My bathroom mirror shimmered faintly, the harbor view in my window warping like water. And sometimes, in the edge of vision, I'd see movement, someone stepping just out of sight. On the fifth night, I woke to the sound of someone breathing inside my room. The air was cold enough that frost traced along the window pane. The breathing was slow, deliberate, and coming from near my desk. I reached for the light. The photograph was glowing faintly, the glass alive with thin strands of light moving beneath its surface. And behind the family, the window. The face was back. But this time, its eyes were open. I fled. I drove through the night until the mountains swallowed the sky again. The road to Tirsil felt narrower now, the trees pressing close as if to keep me from turning back. I parked by the cabin just as dawn broke, a red, bruised light spilling over the peaks. Inside, the air was different, not empty this time, but expectant. The rattle still lay on the floor where I had dropped it, dusted with snow. I picked it up, and the moment I did, a whisper rippled through the house. Thin, childlike, but close. You looked away. The voice came from the window. I turned. The glass no longer reflected the room, but a different scene entirely. The Holts, frozen in their pose, the man's eyes wide in terror. The baby's tiny hand lifted against the pane, as though reaching toward me. Then, slowly, something else rose into view behind them. The same figure from the earlier photograph. Tall, hollow-faced, draped in shadow. It pressed its hand against the inside of the glass, matching the baby's. The surface bulged outward, the boundary between image and air thinning to near translucence. I stepped back, heart hammering. The air pulsed once, then the glass cracked outward in a perfect circle. From within, a breath escaped. Cold, damp, real. I don't remember screaming, only the crash of wood as I stumbled backward and ran into the snow. I didn't stop until I reached the car. When I looked back, the window was whole again. The figure was gone, but in its place, something small glimmered on the ground beneath the sill. I approached slowly and brushed aside the snow. It was a shard of mirror, old, silvered, its edge dull. I pocketed it without thinking. Back in Bergen, I couldn't bring myself to resume teaching. The university's review board found nothing abnormal in the photograph, which they sealed in a restricted archive. The digital files remained missing. Lars never returned. Weeks passed. My apartment grew colder despite the heating. At night, I sometimes heard a faint tapping from the drawer where I'd hidden the mirror fragment. One evening, I decided to end it, to destroy the thing once and for all. I took it to the harbor, intending to throw it into the sea. But when I held it up to the light, something shimmered across its surface. Not my reflection, but the face of the woman from the photograph, staring out with the same stillness, her lips moving soundlessly. And behind her, faint but undeniable, a child's hand pressed to the glass. Then a whisper. You looked away. The mirror slipped from my fingers and vanished into the dark water below. For a moment, the harbor was perfectly still. Then the surface rippled outward in concentric circles, like breath on cold glass. I never saw the photograph again. The university claims it's misplaced. I suspect it never was. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and low over the water, I catch my reflection in the window and think I see someone standing behind me, tall, featureless, patient. And when I turn to look, the glass is empty. Only my breath lingers there, soft and pale, like a promise written in frost.